Welcome to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Election day around the corner, so we are joined by Julie Rodewald. She is the Registrar Recorder in San Luis Obispo County, one of 58 counties in our great state. She knows how much I love elections and election pamphlets and paraphernalia, so she brought me the just minted California General Election booklet put out by the California Secretary of State. I will read it cover to cover. I am that guy. Thank you so much for joining us, Julie.
It's a
We
pleasure.
appreciate it. We love having you on the program. So I want to talk about San Luis Obispo County as an example of every other county, because you have the same challenges and struggles and exciting developments going on. Talk to us about this upcoming November 2012 election.
Well, we're
rearing to go.
We're right into the thick
Exactly.
of things. You know, the ballots are proofed and the sample ballots are proofed,
Right.
and we've gotten ballots out to our military and overseas
Already?
voters.
Wow.
Right, those are required to be out by 60 days. Well, that's the first day we can mail them or communicate with them is 60 days before the election.
And what's interesting about this particular county, in addition to all the statewide issues, in addition to the presidential race, 5 cities have city council races. Several municipalities and special districts have special votes, be it users tax, fire tax, sales tax. I mean, it goes on and on. This is an important election.
Yeah, we have a lot of contests on the ballot. It doesn't translate, it doesn't really mean anything to anybody, but we've got 37 different ballot types, which means for a jurisdiction, that's how many different combinations of school districts, special districts, cities that we have on the, that we'll be presenting to our voters.
And let's talk about voting, because in 2012, in the presidential primary, California was in June. We had been in March, I believe, in 2004, so we saw a spike in presidential primary voting then. I understand the voter turnout in June 2012 was left something to be desired.
It was dismal.
Dismal.
Yes, it was dismal from our point of view. We didn't even reach 50% in San Luis Obispo County, which is always disappointing, and I think statewide it was way down.
And what's interesting is in this county there were 2 hot supervisorial contests. And in fact, an incumbent was elected, another incumbent was defeated. And so it wasn't as if there wasn't local races to drive. There was a congressional primary on the Republican side. The former Lieutenant Governor, Abel Maldonado, had a real race before him. He did make it through to the primary. We'll be facing Lois Capps in the general, a Democrat. So I was surprised.
Yeah, it's but remember too that it was our first top 2 primaries. So when you talked about the the race in the Republican contest, it was they were actually on the same ballot. You do tend to see higher turnouts in those areas that have contested races.
Could you break that down?
Yes. So,
and did you see that?
So yeah. So the 5th and the 3rd districts definitely had higher turnout. City of Aurora Grande had a local measure; it had a higher turnout, but it still was not a very good turnout for any election, if you ask me. But those where the top of the ticket is not hotly contested tend to be lower turnout elections.
Mr. Romney had all but wrapped up the nomination. There was no fight on the Democratic side.
Right, exactly.
The good news is, at least as it relates to what I believe, voting is being made easier.
That's what we think that it is,
And so talk to us about, for example, the uptick in permanent absentee voters, of which I am one.
Right. It's about in 2000 is when the law changed, allowed anybody to become a permanent vote-by-mail voter. Before you had to request it for each election. And we've increased from that. Before that, we were about 5,000 voters. We're now, I look today, 79,000.
Wow. And
of our 147,000. So we're at 53% of our voters are requesting ballots for every election.
And do you find that those permanent VBM voters vote in higher numbers?
You know, that's hard to say. The problem with the permanents, I'll tell you who votes in the highest number are those who request a ballot to be mailed to them.
Specifically?
For a specific election. We get a much higher return on those. So people sign up to be permanent vote-by-mail voters, but that doesn't mean that they're really that interested in the election, and so they may not return their ballots.
I think if the ballot arrives, I mean, there it is for you. Just put it in the mailbox and you're done.
Right.
So let's talk about some upcoming dates that are important, because I understand voter registration in this county, for example, is down a bit. compared to 2008.
Right. Yeah, and that's typical as we move into an election cycle, because we do a purge that helps us keep our voter rolls clean. Anybody who didn't vote, we send a card, and if we get something back from the post office saying they don't live here anymore, they're placed on an inactive list. So they're still eligible to vote. We just don't have to send them material any longer if they're not there. So we're about where we would expect to see. We're maybe 2,000 less than we were in 2008. But again, we had a contested primary in 2008, so our numbers had already grown a little bit higher. We're expecting to get up about 161,000, 162,000.
So what is the deadline? When is the deadline to register to vote?
Right. So there's a couple, and we like to encourage people to register early. That's our biggest thing. Don't wait till the last minute.
Right.
So October 9th is what we call our 29-day close, and anybody who's registered by that date, either we receive it or it's postmarked by that date, is eligible to be mailed like the state voter guide or the county sample ballot.
And I recently was looking at a Twitter feed of the Secretary of State of California, and there was a link to click to register online.
Right.
You can do that?
Well,
or is it you're printing it out and mailing it?
No, as soon as it goes live, and we're waiting for the live date. Now it may be by the time we air. That yes, a voter can register completely online. They fill out the form, and then there's a link to the DMV database, and it sends us not only their data, but also their signature from the DMV database.
And that can be matched.
And that can be matched. And so that becomes the voter's signature that we have on file for them, and we get the data imported into our system.
I mean, there's just no excuse.
Right.
There's no excuse not to register to vote. You can do it on your computer. I don't want to presume everyone has a computer.
Right.
But, I mean, it is being made so easy in California.
Right.
Other states, that's another conversation. But in California...
But they can still do it the old-fashioned way. Fill out a form, sign it, send that in to us. That's still available.
Okay, so the 29-day close is October 9th.
Right, and then the absolute final last day that you have to have it either to us or postmarked is October 22nd. That's 15 days before the election.
So technically, October 22nd is your deadline.
Right.
But
we say do it early.
I agree. Now, let us say that one of our viewers, wants to vote by mail. I know there are deadlines for that.
Right.
Explain those deadlines.
So the first day that we can mail those ballots is October 9th. It's actually October 8th, but that's a holiday, a county holiday, so it's October 9th. The last day that they can request that is 7 days before the election, which is October 30th. So that we have to receive the request by then to mail a ballot. After that, a voter can come into our office and get a ballot up until 8 o'clock on election night.
And can you vote?
Yes.
On November 5th? November 4th, 3rd, 2nd?
Yes. Yes.
You can go to the Registrar of Voters and vote right there.
We'll issue you a vote by mail ballot, but you can just fill it out and vote it right there. So we're not like a polling place.
I understand.
In that we don't just get it and go into a ballot box. It goes into an envelope and we treat it as a vote by mail ballot.
Now here's what's interesting. The ballot must be received on election day, not postmarked.
No,
received.
Not postmarked, received.
And that has caused a lot of heartache for several counties. I know, for example, I think it was Riverside County a few years back had some real challenges.
There were some that got left at a post office.
And so what do you do with those ballots? It went to court, da-da-da.
Right.
So if you were to offer advice, what is the drop dead date to get your VBM ballot into a post box?
You know, especially with the threat of closures for post offices, we are encouraging people to get them, if they're going to mail them, put them in the mailbox by the Wednesday before the election.
That's 6 days before.
Yeah, we used to say the Thursday. You know, if you put it in on Friday or Saturday, we may well get it. You could even put it in there on Monday, but there's no guarantee, and we'd rather have those in our hands.
Julie Rodewald, we thank you for joining us. She is the Registrar Recorder for San Luis Obispo County. Don't forget to vote November 6th. Register, vote, whatever it is. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition. Welcome to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you're with us today. We are joined by Dr. Julian Crocker. He is the elected superintendent of schools in San Luis Obispo County. And I want to speak with you, sir, as we start with regard to the STAR test, the standardized test that students take every year in public schools. Over the last 4 years, both in San Luis Obispo County and the state of California, tests have been rising. Scores are increasing. Seems counterintuitive given the last 4 years we have seen budgets plummet.
Right. It's a very good question. It's a key question. I get that all the time,
Yes,
Brad.
I'm
so I'm
sure
glad,
you do.
Glad
Yes.
you asked it. Two responses. One, the test is really narrow measurement, and it really focuses on English language arts and math primarily. So what is not shown in the test are the subjects that we are not able to address as much now because of the decreased revenue, particularly even things like science or social studies, since those aren't primarily tested. Some of them are tested, but it really focuses on English language arts and math. And not to mention things like art, music, those
Right.
kinds of things. So if I'm a classroom teacher, I have more kids than I had last year, I will focus my attention on those things that are measured. So the scores could go up. What it doesn't show, what the scores don't show, is what is not being provided because of that second casualty.
Right. Now, so we see that in San Luis Obispo County, for example, the districts do better than California average, which I'm sure is of great pride for you.
Good.
We see year to year, the scores are increasing for the last 4 years. In English language arts, up 4 points in 4 years, math up 4 points in 4 years in this county. What's not up, though, although actually I think it is up, but it's still lower, is those students who are English language learners.
Right.
And those in poverty.
And children in poverty. And that's the classic achievement gap. And the interesting thing in our county is all of those demographics are going up, but the gap is remaining. And in some places, Brad, it's as high as 15 to 20 points difference between the achievement of youngsters in poverty and youngsters not in poverty. And
So
that's
it's really
a real
more
challenge.
of a socioeconomic issue than a language issue?
I feel like that. Language is certainly a part of it, but in our county we tend to focus more on the economic issues.
So what's the answer?
We know, that's the good news, we know what will work. First, universal preschool, quality preschool for all 3 and 4 year olds, at least 5 hours a day. We're way far, we don't have that now for most kids, particularly lower income kids. That's a first. Secondly, our very best teachers in our most needy classrooms and schools. That's an internal thing many times that districts can control if we do that. Sometimes it's a bargaining issue.
Right.
A transfer
and
issue.
what determines who is the best teacher?
I'm very comfortable in thinking that, number one, teachers know who are the best, but principals and administrators do know who is best, regardless of how you may assess them.
Right.
We know teachers who are effective. It's like a medical analogy. You want your best heart surgeon with the person who's having the triple bypass.
So do you have those measurements, though? I mean, we've spoken about this in the past. I think, for example, Lucia Mar School District in this area, it has adopted a new formula through a grant from the federal government that will allow them to at least rate teachers based upon a rubric, as opposed to simply a quick evaluation.
Right. I'm not as concerned about how to rate teachers. I feel very comfortable that within the profession we know who is effective and who is not, whether we use the test scores or not. We know that. I think the larger issue is being able, as I said, to be able to have the flexibility to place the most effective teachers with the most needy schools and a robust staff development program for all teachers.
Here's a challenge that I know you face, given what you've told me in the past, which is offering your support for Proposition 30. And that is the governor's tax initiative that would dedicate a significant portion of the new tax to K-14, K-12. When you look at these scores, it suggests to us that, well, our scores are going up.
Why do we need more money?
Why do we need more money? I mean, I understand your explanation, which is it only test those narrow areas, but I mean, it does complicate the narrative.
I think I'd try to make 2 points. One is for all children, for particularly children in more affluent homes. They know that generally their students may do well in those tested areas. What they miss is art, music, an expanded curriculum. So
Science,
absolutely, in terms of the STEM's need and so forth. So my appeal to them to support Prop 30 is, if you want us to return those items to the curriculum and have a much more comprehensive, expansive curriculum for your children, that's a reason to support Prop 30. For parents whose children are at that lower end, it's pretty obvious. In order for your children to bridge the achievement gap, that's why we need you to support this.
I look at this county, San Luis Obispo County, in a lot of ways as a bellwether county. I believe it voted for President Obama in 2008. It voted for President Bush in 2004. It tends to vote for winners. And so, I think that if we look at Prop 30, San Luis Obispo, again, could be that bellwether. And so I ask you, as you are out and about, what's the general mood on Prop 30?
Well, it's two audiences. Children, parents who have children in school. Obviously, our staff get it. They understand it. They're actively working for this. We have a large retired population in our county, and we have a significant number of 20 to 30-year-olds, young people, many of whom not married, or if they are married, they don't have children in school. So our target are those two groups. Right now, I think it's kind of wait and see with it.
Really?
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a competing initiative, which we know is Prop 38. That is the initiative supported by Molly Munger and endorsed pretty strongly by the Parent Teacher Association. They are not backing down. And that money arguably would go directly to education in a lockbox, as Al Gore would say, and more of it. It's an income tax that applies to all folks. I think it's 0.4% to 2.2% on a sliding scale upward.
No sales tax.
No sales tax. What do you make of that? I mean, I think I spoke with Tom Torlakson, who is the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state. He's endorsed both. I mean, wow.
Yeah. Well, they both give money to schools, so how can you be against that? Obviously. I personally, as you know, because we've talked before, favor Prop 30 because I think it does more to address the structural deficit in the state budget. And over the long term, schools are 40 to 50% of the state budget. So as the state budget goes up or down, schools go up or down. So I'm more committed to addressing that problem for the long-term financial viability of schools.
Have you created contingency plans if Prop 30 fails? Because we have heard that if it does fail, school districts will be forced to eliminate school days. Could be up to 15 school days a year. Right,
and our plans are two ways. One, many districts have simply reserved amounts of money to try to meet that gap if indeed the additional, in our county, 14 to 15 million is taken out to at least get us through this year. A couple of districts have actually gone ahead and made the reductions, like Paso Robles, reducing the school year. So if the proposition does not pass, they will simply continue. If it passes, they will be able to restore some of those non-student days now.
And what about a school district like Paso Robles, who is, some would say, facing insolvency? One could argue, I've been learning more about municipal bankruptcies as a result of San Bernardino and Stockton. And while those get the headlines, I understand the vast majority of municipal bankruptcies, I'm going to use that term broadly, are not cities, but special districts, school districts, water districts.
Yeah, let's separate special districts from school districts. School districts have this mechanism in place, mainly through county offices, to do exactly the prevention that I don't think cities, counties, special districts have in place. So one of the major responsibilities of me and of my office.
Make sure Paso doesn't go under?
Exactly, does not. And that's why we're in there so heavy right now.
And you had been the superintendent for Paso Robles School District, so you know that district well.
I know it well.
Okay.
It's a good district.
I'm sure it is. His name is Dr. Julian Crocker. He is the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the County of San Luis Obispo. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition.
Who currently serves as the California State Auditor? John Chung, Elaine Howell, Bill Lockyer, or Betty Yee? Appointed in 2000, Elaine Howell serves as the auditor for the state of California.
Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are now joined by Chris Ungar. He is the president of the school board at San Luis Coastal Unified School District, which is one of the largest school districts in San Luis Obispo County. So I just spoke with Dr. Julian Crocker, who is the superintendent of schools for the entire county. We were speaking about the strong STAR test scores, both in the county and in California. What's your take on the fact that the standardized test scores for the state and the county continue to rise over the last 4 years as budgets are dropping over the last 4 years?
Well, I think first of all that it shows we're really starting to focus on what it is that we want kids to know. As we learn about those things, then we could have the teachers target the important things that the important educational things that kids need to know. The downside of it is, of course, that I think it's somewhat limiting.
Right. Yeah, Dr. Crocker had mentioned that. He had said that, you know, by relying upon these STAR test scores as a gauge, as a guide, you do become very focused on just English language arts and just math.
Right. And I think just parts of it too. They are multiple choice tests. You know, some of us, I remember in college learning about how to write multiple choice tests.
Right.
You know, the old joke is it's a multiple guess test in some ways.
Right.
So they're multiple choice tests. I think one of the concerns we have, one of the concerns I certainly have is this really testing knowledge, or is it testing test-taking skills and abilities? The next step, and I think we're going to see this with the Common Core assessments, we can talk about that.
Please.
Is digging deeper, digging into the understanding of, do kids get what it is they're learning?
Right.
So, for example, a math problem might be, I'm not a math head. We could do a math problem. A kid on the old style tests could do the computation, and that would and guess on the answer, and they get it right. They get it right.
Right.
What we expect to see, and what we think we're going to see with these Common Core standards coming up in 2014, is you do the computation, now demonstrate how you got there. You either need to use words, you need to use diagrams, you need to show us that you have the underlying knowledge that helped you receive that answer.
Because oftentimes when you're taking a multiple choice test, you can back into the answer. If you have 4 choices right there, you back in. And so, you know, that does show some smarts, but it also shows that you may not really know how to get the answer.
Right.
It's a backwards method.
And of course, the other piece about the standardized testing, and this I think is going to be very interesting, relates really to teacher evaluation.
And we can talk about that because there have been bills in Sacramento to alter that formula. I know I had mentioned this to Dr. Crocker. Your sister school district, Lucia Mar, received a grant to allow them to engage in a different form of teacher evaluation using a rubric that includes standardized test scores.
Right.
As we speak today, most, if not all, school districts in California do not include standardized test scores in teacher evaluation.
And that's right. And standardized test scores, student achievement. How are you going to measure student achievement? And I think that's going to be really a topic for the future, because the race to the top from the federal government.
That was the program that California did not receive funding for. Although didn't they get in round 2B, they got a small amount?
They may have gotten a small amount, but one of the concerns about, it was called AB5, which addressed the teacher evaluation, was, well, because now California doesn't really have a method of testing student achievement, are we going to qualify for the race to the top funds? Our school district, as a matter of fact, did negotiate with the teachers. We haven't received the vote yet, but part of the negotiation was student achievement.
So you will be allowed to use scores as a method to determine teacher excellence.
We would use, I believe we could use STAR scores, but I think we want to look at overall student achievement as well.
Let me ask you though.
And it's going to be very interesting. It's funny because it was negotiated with the teachers. We sat down with the teachers. We had a committee of teachers, administrators, facilitated meeting where this group came up with this rubric to help really maybe some more genuine teacher evaluations.
I do want to ask you though about standardized tests, because there has been a hue and cry about whether we rely too much on them. Governor Brown, for example, in his 2012 State of the State address called for limits on standardized exams. So on the one hand, we have parents saying, I want standardized tests to be part of teacher evaluations. On the other hand, they're saying you're teaching too much to the test, and this is too much pressure and stress and strain.
Yeah, exactly. And we also hear, and you're not teaching history, and you're not teaching science, and you're not teaching music, and you're not teaching art, and we're not getting to those things until after the standardized testing window closes, typically in May. I don't think the question is, should we rely on standardized testing or not? I think maybe the fundamental question is, does the standardized testing that we're using right now genuinely test kids' knowledge and kids' learning?
Does it?
I don't think it does. And looping back around to these Common Core assessments, I think that's where we're going to start seeing more, more robust, more measurements about whether, in fact, what we're doing works. So we'll have these standardized assessments, because if we don't, if we don't have some kind of standardization, how do you know what you're measuring against?
And in the final analysis, as much as we may not like standardized tests, there's something called an SAT.
Right.
And until the SAT goes away, it seems to me that we need to at least train kids to figure out how to take standardized tests.
Well, kids need to learn how to take standardized tests, and absolutely there's the SAT. I haven't taken the SAT in years, so I can't tell you what's on.
I need to digress. Yeah.
Sure.
So my niece is she's now in 12th grade. She's studying for her SAT, and so I took an SAT online, not the full test, and you're going to love this. On English, I got 100%.
Right.
On math, I got 0. I'm not kidding you.
Yeah, yeah.
I could not do the math.
Well, but
what does that tell you?
Well, I think what it tells me, I think that's so interesting, because what it tells me is you're probably using math every single day in your life.
But not that math.
But not that math. And so what good does it do to know x plus y squared?
A single math question.
So, but functionally, what do you do to turn those kind of questions into things that are usable for people? And banking, that's where I'm kind of excited about these Common Core assessments, because now we're saying, okay, you've got train leaves, train leaves, when do they meet? So why is that important? Explain to us why that's important.
What about, though, the continuing achievement gap? Dr. Crocker discussed this, and it was interesting. I didn't realize this distinction. I had thought the achievement gap had been more pronounced with English language learners, and he had indicated that wasn't as much as an indicator as poverty levels, socioeconomic levels.
Right. Poverty levels are clearly the #1 achievement gap when you look at the figures. And there are different ways of looking at the achievement gap. Typically, we look at socioeconomic status, we look at race and ethnicity, and we look at English language learners, and then we look at students with disabilities. So that's where we're seeing the gaps. Now, what can happen, though, is a student could fall into several of those categories. So a student could become Hispanic and an English language learner and special education.
And come from a home of lesser economic needs.
Exactly. So there are other factors involved. That said, I don't want to be an apologist, because there are clearly achievement gaps, and we need to keep working on that. We're seeing some narrowing of that, but not as much as we'd like.
In our final moments, I know that you are a supporter of Proposition 30, the governor's tax initiative. I think Prop 38 as well.
Yes.
The Molly Munger's tax initiative. Are you concerned that these strong test scores could hurt the case for those propositions?
I would hope not. I hope people recognize that money is clearly tied to our ability to educate kids. I think if we get to a point where we see school year going down to 165 days, clearly that's going to have a negative effect.
And that could happen, according to the governor, if Prop 30 fails.
That's right.
So
that's one of the triggers.
What are your voters, constituents saying?
We're seeing, in fact, I just read some polling data yesterday that actually the governor's initiative is more support.
Right.
When you start when you start when you start hearing the positives, it gets more support.
Interesting.
And even the negatives don't take it down below 50%.
We'll have to see what happens.
Munger too.
His name is Chris Ungar. He is president of the school board of San Luis Coastal. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition.